Welcome to this new episode of Mind, Mood, and Food. And today, our subject is what is the emotional scale? And I know there'll be a lot of emotions on that scale, Adele. So, why don't you start telling us from the very start what this episode is all about?
Yes, I'd love to. So today I'm going to get a little bit technical and try and share my screen. So for those people that are listening, if you do want a visual, if you're a visual learner, you might want to hop onto YouTube now instead of listening on iTunes or Spotify to just have a look. So the emotional scale, I'm not entirely sure if it's completely credited to Abraham Hicks and Esther
Mm.
Hicks if you've ever heard of those. They are the same person. Esther Hicks channels spirit, and she calls the spirits the collective Abraham. And I've associated this with her work, but I'm sure it's probably used wider than that. I'm not sure if it was exactly coined by them, but nevertheless, it's really useful, and especially in the work that I do in terms of what the heck yoga is for in the first place, because it's not just to stretch out your body, as lovely as that feels, as I'm always banging on about. Really, it's to manage this, it's to manage the mind. And the ultimate goal of yoga is that joy and bliss, ananda,
Yeah.
as we call it. And that is to kind of feel that and feel your higher self, because your true inner spark, inner sparkle, inner light is never feeling lower down that emotional
Mm.
scale. But
Yeah.
we forget that because it's all masked by the ego, by the protection that we think we have to do to protect this, to protect our meat suit, our physical body, to protect our pride. How
Mm.
often do we argue as if it's life and death to prove that we are right? Like, how dare you disagree with me? I am right and you are wrong. And if you did step back and think, really?
Does
I
it
even do it
really
with my
matter?
kids sometimes, and it's like I have to think, whoa, I'm the adult, and actually, what am I doing?
Yeah.
But normal human emotions and human attributes will have you protected, and that's ego.
Mm.
Ego will want to create separation. So yoga's all about unity. It's all about we're not separate. I'm not separate from you. You're not separate from me. We're all one. We're all little drops in the ocean, and that if
Mm.
you think of it as an ocean, we're all little drops or consciousness expressing itself. So that might sound a little bit like woo woo or a bit high level, but I think it's important context in why I use the emotional scale.
Mm.
So just having a little look, let's see. Can we see the emotional scale?
I can.
I hope that you can too if you're watching this on YouTube. So right down there at the bottom then, we've got these feelings of fear. So anxiety would come into that, fear, being really scared, depression, feeling really powerless about your circumstances, victim kind of mode, um,
Would you
feeling,
Sorry, Adele, would you say that these ones are typically to do with the ego or
yeah,
just some? Mm.
anything down here in the bottom
Mm.
half is got to be to do with the ego. Without the
Yeah,
ego, you wouldn't be feeling fear and anxiety because
yeah,
there's nothing to fear.
yeah.
So I know this have as I have anxiety, or I'm recovering from anxiety, should I say, um, moving up this emotional scale through the work that I do, through the yoga practice, and through that connection to that higher self. And you can get glimpses of it when you do like a lot of practice and meditation and listening to inspirational stuff, that there's nothing to fear. Like, even the highest, most largest fear that any of us could have is death, right? And
Yeah.
we often don't like to think about that because we're like, oh, of course there's something to fear. If I die, that's the end. So it depends whether you choose to believe, because I'm aware that there'll be lots of different belief
Yeah.
systems, people listening to this, so you don't have to kind of believe in God or heaven or any of that. But I always say, like, well, what's going to serve you better? You know, if you choose to believe that when you die, that's it, bump, the lights go out, your soul is gone and it's all just finished,
Mm.
that if you enjoy believing that, then you crack on. I'm not here to convince anyone otherwise. But if you believe that you are energy, and why wouldn't you? Because everything's energy and we are energetic beings. And we now know, like, even science is catching up all the time with what the yogis knew 2, 3 thousand years ago.
Mm.
You know, um, through this, they had a direct experience in meditation of this
Yeah.
other part of themselves that wasn't about just their body, and they have written this down and been kind enough to share it with us, through the teachings, through the sages, through, you know, through the scriptures, that we are energy and energy cannot be created or destroyed. And we know that. So quantum physics and all of that stuff, it is catching up. And if you do look into that, it's very like, whoa, trying to understand quantum physics, blow your mind. But if it gives you that sense of, even if you die, you're still not, it's not over. You know, you
Yeah.
might not be having the same experience, but if you look into people who've had NDEs and near death experiences, there's plenty of stuff out there on that, where there's a common thread, or they talking about things that they could not have possibly known. They
Yeah.
couldn't have known it because
Mm.
they weren't there. They were in a coma, but
Mhm.
they're talking about what people were wearing, what they were talking about, that they could hear loved ones. So there is, you know, if you need a bit more scientific proof, it is out there. But anyway, so this fear, this ultimate fear is of death. So if you can kind of get over that, you know, that's not to say you don't go around taking care of your body, because your body will run out like a
Yeah.
car that you use. If you don't take good care of it,
Yeah. But
anything
there's a
runs out.
difference between taking care
And
and
being
being
afraid.
afraid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just
Mhm.
living in that fear. And
Yeah.
so, you know, there's plenty of fears that people have. I have a whole course on this, Living Life Fearlessly, a 30-day course, that, you know, touches on all sorts to do with fear. So if anyone wants information, just get in touch. We can be afraid of heights, we can be afraid of spiders, we can be afraid of all sorts of things. And, you know, people can have phobias.
Wasps.
Yeah, and they can be very real, can't they? And
Yeah.
it can all feel very real, but without going into this particular emotion into too much depth, just
Mm.
due to time, and to keep this about the emotional scale, this is the very, very bottom of the emotional scale. Now, you might not move up the emotional scale exactly like this. Like
Yeah. You
sometimes
might go,
people, you might jump a
yeah.
couple, and, you know, but sometimes people need to go through it. So if you're feeling really powerless, instead of feeling like you're striving for happiness, which is, you know, way up here.
Yeah.
If you're thinking, I'm right down here feeling fear, despair, depression, and powerlessness, and feeling like a victim, and a victim of my external circumstances, and you're striving for happiness, it's a bit of a jump.
Yeah.
It's a lot of a jump.
Mm.
And it might be that through your processing, you need to work through anger. You might need to work through blame. You might
Mm.
need to work through, on have an aspiration to get to a point where you just feel a little bit, you know, neither
You're all
down
right.
nor
Yeah.
up, you know,
Hmm.
just flat. So you might feel a little bit bored, you know, a little bit moving towards contentment as you start to move to the top half of the scale. So it's just a nice way to have a little, kindness to yourself
Mm.
and patience, and to not be too hard on yourself if
Yeah.
you're feeling, you know, right down here, that you need to kind of think, what's the next emotion, what's the next emotion, and just aim for that. So like I
Yeah.
say, don't think of it as you've got to physically work through every single one, because that
No.
can cause, confusion, and it can cause people to try and reach for perfection in terms of, I need to be angry now. And, you know, I can feel sometimes into that fear and anxiety, but I don't feel like I necessarily go through anger to get up here.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll fluctuate from, a little bit of frustration, irritation, and impatience, which is quite far up the scale there.
Mhm.
So the scale, if you can't see it on screen, moves from the fear and the despair at the bottom through a feeling of unworthiness, little bit of insecurity, up to maybe jealousy and envy, where you're a little bit bitter because everyone else seems to have it sorted, and it's, you're looking maybe when you're on social media too much and you're just looking at what everyone else is doing, and everyone looks like they've got their shit together and you haven't. It's not
Yeah.
true, by the way. None
No,
of us have our
definitely not
shit
true.
together.
This
And then you,
actually this actually reminds me of, you have got that grief down at the bottom. So
mm,
when you
yeah,
have had, the passing of someone important to you,
mm,
these I can
change curve.
definitely, yeah, absolutely see some
Yeah.
of those kind of
Yeah,
emotions
and it,
within
it
there.
might be useful to think of it as a kind of like wavy line, so
Yeah,
you might go through some and not others, and you can have a line going through. So whatever works. Um, so moving up to kind of blame, a little bit of worry, maybe you're a little bit doubting over whether you can have what you want and you can ever be happy again. I remember feeling like this when I
mm,
at my lowest. My brain tricked me into thinking that I would never be happy again because I'd lost the skill of being happy. And my emotions were very flat.
mm,
And they were, hovering around that point, which is a little bit like when you're in depression, you're kind of hovering around that flat line. So then we could, move into overwhelm. Overwhelm's a higher up emotion than despair and grief and depression, because when you're depressed, you're just not interested in doing anything.
yeah,
Can't even get out of bed in the morning, it's all too much. But overwhelm, when you're active and you're doing your tasks and your work, you can feel a little bit swamped.
yeah,
Moving up to just mild irritation and frustration, a little bit impatient. Moving up then into kind of the brighter colours, then to just a little bit pessimistic rather than optimistic. And then we move
mm,
to boredom, and that's just below contentment. So there's a very fine line between kind of feeling meh and feeling bored
yeah,
to being content.
yeah,
You're neither up nor down. You're just kind of like, feeling okay, feeling
yeah.
okay. And there's nothing wrong with striving for contentment. I
Not
was
at all.
working with a client on this last week who wants to feel happy. And it's like, let's go for contentment. Let's go for not going up and down through those emotions and swinging.
Yeah,
You're really happy and then you're like, boom, down there because life has happened, something's happened and it's really rocked you. You want to kind of feel like you've got that resilience and you're in your center, and you know stuff happens, but you can bounce back from it and
yeah.
you're still feeling contentment.
Mhm. And I think sometimes as well, this might be more prevalent for younger people, that feeling of boredom has been said to actually be quite good for people.
Yes, we don't have that anymore. So it
No.
might was a surprise to people. Like, I used to be bored all the time when I was younger, but I don't think they said is people don't allow themselves to be bored.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
being bored makes you a little bit more creative,
yeah.
finding something to do. Like, do you remember back in the day where you'd be like, well, maybe I'll do a puzzle or do some
Exactly.
colouring or I'll write a story or, read a book. To being bored, instead of just having these days, we've got everything on tap and we've
Yeah,
got TikTok and all that sort of stuff. So if anyone is ever slightly bored just for a second, they'll be just going on looking
yeah.
for that hit.
Mhm.
And that's what that doing is really reducing our attention span. So the attention span of people is just getting worse and worse
It's
and
about,
worse.
what, about 2 or 3 seconds or
Yeah.
something now?
It's like,
Like,
where is that going to
whoa.
end? So you're right, like aiming to be a bit bored and allowing yourself to be a bit bored is not a bad thing.
No, no,
And
definitely not.
then, feeling okay with that. And you feel okay with just being with your thoughts or, sitting just quietly,
Mhm.
being mindful, though that's around that boredom and contentment type area. Then you might be able to move into feeling hopeful, because you might feel like, if you have been bored and you're feeling satisfied with that, that's when you can kind of get those creative juices flowing in your mind. You'll know that you probably get your best ideas when you're on the toilet or in the shower or out for a walk. Because
Yeah,
those are the
definitely.
only times when maybe we allow ourselves the space, or
Yeah,
maybe when we do meditation, if you have a meditation practice.
yeah.
And you might think, that's a good idea. I'm going to go and do that course, or I'm going to go to that place that I've been thinking about going to, or, something like that.
Yeah.
So then moving up, then you might start to feel like belief and positivity and optimism. You might start to get enthusiasm, eagerness even, and that happiness. And then higher than that is passion for something and that top level joy, gratitude, appreciation, and feeling of empowerment and freedom, love, as in the highest emotion that we can have.
Mm.
So I'm just going to stop that sharing for a second. So that's the emotional scale and really fits in well with the work I do, like I said, with yoga and finding your inner sparkle, because it's all about moving people from the bottom there of that fear, depression, which is where people tend to be who come to me
Mhm.
and do yoga or do yoga therapeutically with me, and moving not just up to feel okay, that's what we can aim for in the beginning, but
Yeah.
that can springboard onto once you feel satisfied and more content with what is. And this can move into another podcast that we've already done, the I'll Be Happy When podcast, because
Yeah.
you know, if you're down here and you're thinking, it's because of my circumstances, and
Mhm.
you're blaming it on your circumstances, and you're like,
Yeah.
well, I will feel those emotions higher up the scale when I have the thing,
Exactly. Yeah.
it's not going to
Are you
work.
sure?
It's
No.
not going to work. So if you can get yourself into that better place and just go for that little bit higher up the scale emotionally and take baby steps and just be really kind to yourself. So if you are right down at the bottom, what you need is self-care.
Yeah.
What you need is rest. What you need is nurturing. What you need is time,
Yeah.
and maybe talking therapy or a practice like yoga therapy and things like that to move you up the scale. And then, I was speaking to my client last week as if little flower that's a bit wilted, that just it needs some TLC. So it's no good thinking, well, what I want to do is move, and what I want to do is get a different job because this is what,
Mm-mm.
she thought would create that happiness. It's like, no, what you need is that self-care
That
and that
nature.
time and that
Yeah.
space. And it's like watering that little seed and watering that plant that you've just rescued from the garden centre in the for sale section.
Yeah.
Once it starts to be stronger, that's when it can bloom. That's when you can go, "Oh, what do I love doing?" And, doing it from that place
Yeah.
is going to be far more effective rather than doing it from a desperate place of this is going to make me happy. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't, then you just back down where you started.
It's that thing between the likes of like and love, with the same kind of things you did with a plant there. If you like something, it's like plucking a flower. If you're loving something, you're feeding it, you're nurturing it, you're watering it, you're taking care of it. And that's a difference between like and love.
Yeah, it's a really important concept,
Mm.
and it's one that I don't think people think about unless you do this kind of work. You just if you're what we call kind of asleep in yoga world, yoga terminology, that you haven't woken up and started to live more consciously and to
Mm.
really question what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you feel, and just really being aware of your body and your breath and your mind and all of that, you know,
Mm.
how you feel emotionally, and just starting to, so that emotional scale, it's just a lovely visual really to say, and we will move throughout
Oh yeah.
even the day. Sometimes you can go from despair to so it's
Yeah.
not that, like I said, it's not like it's this gradual, um like a course of going from here and then I'll be here, and so I think
Yeah.
take
It's
it with
not
a
the
pinch of
steps up.
salt, but yeah,
You
it's
can
just,
actually jump
oh
from one
yeah,
to all over the place.
and
Yeah.
some people maybe more than others, and obviously there's so much that can come into this in terms of hormones, and that can make, there's obviously disorders like bipolar that can make
Yeah.
people's emotions fluctuate, and for that you may have already sought medical help. I hope
Hmm.
so. If you know you've got that wildly fluctuating emotion, you will need help to balance that out
Yeah.
chemically and with medication. So this is more for people that just know that you kind of struggle with your emotions, again, like you say, it could be useful if you've got teenagers or children and you wanted to help them with their emotions because they can fluctuate just because of the
Yeah.
hormones that they have at that age. And again, this is a subject that we might need to come back to because you could tap into each one of those emotions. You could, we could talk about this a lot in terms of how to regulate and manage those
Yeah.
emotions.
Even just giving names to the emotions as well really
Yeah, and
helps.
just to know that it's okay and it's
Yeah.
part of being a human. There's a lot that in society, what's the word? It kind of pressure for people to suppress their emotions. Like if you cry, if you're upset, what is the
Keep that
thing
to
that
yourself.
everybody
Yeah.
does?
Mm.
And we all do
Tries to
it.
stop you.
Stop, hug. It's about stopping that emotion, and it's because we're not comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's our emotion. We feel like we've got to fix it. So we're like, there, here's a tissue, have a hug. Now I've stopped doing that. Um, we've recently lost a loved one, and I've been supporting my husband through that. And like, if he's upset or if the children are upset for any reason, I used to be that stop
Yeah.
trying to stop it. And now I'm like, let it out. My
Mm.
message is, I'm here. I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to like hold your hand if that's what you want. What do you need? Or do you want to be on your own? But it's just let it out.
Yeah.
It's okay. Cry. It's fine. Just express the emotion. If you're angry, you might need to let it out by hitting a pillow, doing something in that controlled way, using like lion's breath, like breathing
Yep.
out strongly. For a time, like don't get stuck in the
Yeah.
emotion. If you don't express it, you're going to get stuck. So let it out, and then you might find that if you're kind to yourself, you allow it, you normalize it, and you normalize it for other people who are going through it. Then your body knows what to do. It will process it, and you will move out of that emotion into a better place
Yeah.
in good time.
Yeah. Absolutely. The whole thing is learning to understand and know what those emotions are and what you can do about them. How
Yeah.
you can not necessarily move on, but how can you actually manage them, deal with them so you
How can
are
you
able
hold the
to,
space,
yeah,
container for that emotion to express itself? So I've done
yeah,
some work with primary school kids on this, using things like those techniques, breathing, lion's breath. If you're feeling really sad and depressed and you're in that place, sometimes I would recommend always doing those small steps, like
mm,
just make your bed. Like the is it the Navy? There's a TED talk or something called Make Your Bed. You can look it up. I think it's called that. But it's all about that little task might
yeah.
be all you can do, and it gives you that dopamine hit.
But you've done something in your
And
day,
just
productive,
and be
yeah,
really happy that you've made your bed, you've got dressed, you've maybe had a shower like that. It could be three massive things.
yeah, exactly.
So I think we
Holy.
need to come back to managing some of those.
Yeah,
Let us know if you would like that in the comments. That'd be useful.
absolutely. Definitely comment and great visual this time around. So
Mm.
if you have listened, absolutely pop over to watching this visually on YouTube. If you've got any questions at all, I'm sure Adele will be happy to answer them for you. And hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and please do visit us on YouTube. We'd love to see you there. Thank you very much, Adele. That was so insightful, and I'm sure loads of people will have loads of questions. But until next time, I shall see you later. Bye
Bye,
bye.
guys. Thanks for listening.